If you like The Different Knock and want to see more, you can access our bonus content on Patreon and YouTube memberships for just £3 a month. Facing the media before the clash against United last Sunday, Mikel Arteta, in my opinion, delivered one of the best press conferences of his managerial career. He boosted Havertz's confidence and name-checked his qualities, spoke lucidly on player development while defending Arsenal from bad actors, then reminded the assembled press how little they and we know about the inner workings of the tactical and technical side of the game. He did it all with a smile on his face and remained professional. No easy feat when you consider some of the ways that Arsenal are being spoken about at the moment. In it, he delivered a slightly left field, but ultimately effective, analogy about his drive to work. He talked about having to take different roads dependent on times, traffic, time of the year, the state of his car, and so on. Effectively, he was making the point that you can't just stick with one route forever. Things happen that are outside of your control, and different days are different drives. You have to develop different ways of approaching your route, and in this context, games. And that is what he's trying to do. You could argue, and I certainly think this is what Mikel thinks, that Arsenal got found out at the end of last season. Our reliance on certain individuals and a specific way of playing meant our season got derailed, despite how good Plan A was, with 50 points by the halfway mark. In some ways, I believe part of the discontent is from comparing ourselves now with ourselves at this point to last season. But a lot's changed in 12 months, and as Arteta himself says, we now have to find Plan A1, A2, and A3. We talk a lot as fans about knowing our best 11, but for me, that's only really brought up if a team isn't getting the right results. Guardiola and Man City haven't started the same 11 in any of their first 4 matches in the league so far this season. Some of that is enforced, for example with De Bruyne's injury, but most of it isn't. You don't hear a word about it though, because they're 12 points from 12. Pep, even when he could be forgiven for wanting to keep things stable as he recovers from a back injury away from the team, continues to adapt from game to game to find the best way to win. Pep is finding different ways of making it to London Colney, or the Etihad campus in this case, as the demands change. So that's the idea of the tactical tweaks that we're seeing, I think. I hear it, and I think we'll reap the benefits down the line. But I think it's fair to say we're still not at 100% capacity. And as fans, I think we have the right to ask why. Mikel mentioned there were 43 different formations in the game against Man City at Wembley. While I think it was partly to shut the journalists up and show them how little they know, I think it was also revealing. This team is now about subtle tweaks, not just Plan A. Rodri drops back, Havertz changes his pressing angle. Formation 1. Haaland swaps which centre-back he's occupying, Ben White drops back. Formation 2. The dream for any successful organisation is a self-sustaining model, which Arsenal are trying to achieve, so we can win any kind of game. Arteta is trying to give the players the tools to adapt to any game state, not just have one brilliant plan. As Arsenal develop that fluid first 16 or 17 and find plans A1, A2 and A3, here are our biggest problems right now, as I see it. Arsenal, at the moment, are entering the final third far too wide and giving themselves far too much to do. If you go back and watch our opening 4 games, I bet you could count on 2 hands the amount of times we enter the final third in these zones when the other team are in rest defence. We're playing far too often outside of a team's shape, rather than finding and exploiting the spaces inside, and it's pushing us back into the dreaded U-shape of doom, disconnecting us and pushing us into lower XG positions. Part of that is natural as teams find ways to pack the middle, and Palace and Fulham did that especially well. It's up to us to find a way in. I don't know if you remember, but there's a scene in All or Nothing where Mikel Arteta says he'll fine his players £5,000 if Wolves complete a pass into the half spaces from out wide. Against Fulham, the opposition defended those half spaces like dogs, and good on them, because that's where we'll kill you. At the moment, I bet Arteta would give his players £5,000 each to make one pass in there themselves. Another way of looking at it is attacking sides. Arsenal went through the middle 29% of the time against Palace, 24% of the time against Fulham, and 22% of the time against United. So it's been steadily getting worse. And even when we get to the final third, against United, this was our deep completion map, i.e. how many passes we completed near or in their box. The pinky red ones were not completed, so the only completed ones are the black ones, almost exclusively in low XG zones, around the edge of the box with a packed middle. So the question is, how do you fix that? I think there's a few ways you can go about it. Firstly, as any coach will tell you, you have 3 options to break a team down: through, over, and around. If we don't or can't go through teams anymore, and going around is getting us nowhere, then we could go over. Stick Havertz up top and go long for a while. No shame in that at all. Even if that's plan A17, Who cares if it works? If you want the ball to go through teams, then you need players who can receive inside in the right and left half space, under pressure, now that teams are adopting lower and lower blocks against us and compressing the space internally. I'm thinking players with brilliant core strength and technical quality who can take the ball on the half turn, the likes of Saka and Trossard. Getting these guys inside into lanes 2 and 4 to receive from the back line means you have a reliable option inside. Saka came inside much more towards the end against United, and I wanted to see that much sooner. Phil Foden would absolutely thrive in our team at the moment, as he's one of, if not the best in the world at that receive and turn in tight areas. Ødegaard isn't a guy who's going to put his back into a player and play the wall pass, and Havertz isn't quite at the races at the minute. In my view, we need something else in the half spaces. However, the bigger problem for me is the bravery from our high-touch players. The connection between the back line, specifically the centre-backs and the 6, and our 8 has been lost. Have a look at these passing networks from last season against a range of teams, right from City at the Emirates through to Fulham away. I want you to take a particular look at the connection between William Saliba and Martin Ødegaard, and even Rob Holding on one occasion. These are all only up to the first sub, but they tell the story perfectly. The thickness of the line indicates the amount of passes played between two players, with the thicker lines indicating higher volume. Now compare that with our passing networks for this season, and that connection has not only been dramatically reduced, most of the time, it's totally lost. In fact, pause the video and see if you can find a line on any of those between Saliba and Ødegaard this season. I see one thin one against Fulham and nothing else. Without that connection between the lines, or the ability for our players who are taking 100 touches a game to find our 8s even 3 or 5 times a game, we play bland, U-shaped football, as we can't access those central areas. The plan may be to go out to come back in, but if we can't come back in, then what? This also comes onto relationships, and for those of you screaming at your screen right now, I will say, Kai Havertz is part of this. I'll refer back to my video on Havertz and my wider thoughts, which haven't really changed, but it's clear he has an inability to affect the game as much as he might like at the minute. I think a lot of that comes from the relationship between him and those around him, and there's something not quite right about Havertz and Martinelli's relationship. It's only been 4 games, which I'll say again for effect, it has only been 4 games, but that dynamic hasn't been found, I think it's fair to say. Mikel mentioned in that press conference that sometimes it's not about tactics or formations, it's about chemistry. Put Vieira and Martinelli on the same pitch, and they have a connection that can't be coached. It's just pure chemistry, as they're like brothers off the pitch. Around the pitch, there's a few connections that are off, and I would certainly be up for trying a few combinations in that left half space particularly. But then I think, do we want to take our best duel winner, Kai Havertz, out of the team when we go away to Goodison Park, somewhere historically we have really struggled? It's certainly one to think about. We are also just running cold in terms of finishing. Would we even be having this conversation if we'd scored, say, 3 more goals across the 4 games? At the moment, according to FBref, Saka, Martinelli, Havertz, Kiwior and Partey are all running cold on their XG. That's 3 out of our regular front 5. It happens though across seasons, but you don't need stats to tell you that chances like this, and this need to be put away. Mikel is always on about efficiency in both boxes, and we need to up our game. And finally, while I understood the reasoning behind it, which I'll explain in a moment, there's a cautiousness to this team at the moment that I don't like. Our PPDA, passes per defensive action, was up at 18.4 against United. Against Fulham it was 6.4, and against Palace, a man down, it was 8.2. We sat off against United, forcing them to go long, which actually worked to some degree. I can't remember United winning a second ball all day, as Onana was forced long, they couldn't play through us, and we won the ball back. But the problem with allowing the other team to have the ball, as you essentially expect them to give it back to you, is you allow them the opportunity to have moments. The more they touch the ball, the more comfortable they are, and the higher the risk. And even if Arteta didn't expect United to do anything with it, which is a fair assumption, you still run the risk of a mistake on our end and lose precious time on the ball ourselves to do something. Just control the football. Be on the front foot. From a mental and tactical perspective, I want to see Arsenal targeting 75% possession every game, and we should be aiming to dominate every game bar Man City. But I accept that that's a fan-led view from an entertainment perspective, and I'm sat here without millions of people shouting at me if we lose a game. For me though, having assembled one of the most expensive transition control units in the world, we should have been more front-footed. If you think they're rubbish, show them. Don't let them show us. There's a moment in the press conference where Mikel mentions a London cab driver, and how he wouldn't question a person who'd studied for 20 years if they were telling him how to get somewhere in London. Have a listen.
But if I speak to a taxi driver that has learned the whole London for 20 years, I know nothing compared to him, because he will tell me all the streets and options and the best times.
M25 is very bad at the moment, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
I understand his point. I do. He's the expert, he's got the coaching qualifications, there's things he thinks about that I certainly can't comprehend. But I also think we collectively need to remember that this game ultimately belongs to the fans. If the fans aren't entertained, or they think the team has more potential, they have every right to ask questions about what's happening. There's a line, of course, and there are those who seek to destroy Arsenal for their own personal gain, on their YouTube subscribers or their column readers, as Arteta has referred to this week. But trust me only works so far. Show us, then we'll trust you. And it's strange because for most of his reign, that's been Arteta's MO. He's talked about earning the right to play and earning the fans' trust a lot more than essentially doing what he does here and saying, I'm the expert. And I think it's because he feels under attack. Normally so keen to stress the collective, in the presser he changes to the first person when his tactics are questioned. He says, I played differently against Man City, tells his analogy in the first person, and answers questions about, quote, my team from only his perspective. I think his back's against the wall, and maybe to some degree, that's valid. When you're down in 8th and you're not clicking, questions are fair. But when you feel you've proved your level a bit more, nearly 4 years into the job, perhaps it is more annoying to have to explain yourself. But regardless, we as fans are invested. If our team isn't looking perfect, we're concerned. Some people talk to their mates, some people go online. I write 2,500 word video essays and talk about it. I think it's important we challenge the team to be better, but understand how much we don't know. That balance is hard, and no one gets it right all the time, myself included. Mikel has some thinking to do, and I certainly don't have all the answers. I just hope I've provoked some thoughts for you. But if we're not seeing it click on the pitch, much as I massively respect him as a professional and a coach, I think Mikel needs to save us the I'm the expert stuff. If we're not seeing it, we do have the right to question, just calmly and with good intentions. We all, well, most of us, want Arsenal to win. And with 3 wins and a draw out of 4, we're really not doing too bad. As Mikel says,
Tranquilo.